Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation, Anshe Amen. And joining me are my good friends, Rabbi Barry J. Chesler, Solomon Sharif Day School, Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, New York City, Anshe Chesed. We are recording this for Kol Ramah, 102.3 FM. Our friends at Kol Ramah, Mitch Mernick, our producer, director, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening, for watching our YouTube, listening to our broadcast. We have an amazing Parsha. We are talking about Parasha Ekev. Ekev. This is the second Parsha of consolation in the 7 Parshiot that are after Tisha B'Av. And we're going to go right into it. We're going to do a different thing this week. We're going to follow a kind of a little strategy. We've done it before. We did a little with Megillat Esther. Pick a verse, or in Hebrew it would be psok li pesukecha, right? And if just before we get into our verses, let's just talk about this as a strategy. Psok li pesukecha. We find this often in the Talmud when rabbis they want some kind of oracle. Do you want to expand on that, Jeremy, Barry, either of you?
It seems like sometimes it seems like it's like an exercise. You go into a schoolhouse and the young children are reciting Bible. Like in our world, we probably don't have a ton of this, but this is like the madrasas, right? They recite large amounts of Quran so that they can remember it. Yesod Yankuta, the things you learn as a child stick with you for the rest of your life. You learn the Tanakh. Anyone who opens the Talmud is always incredibly impressed that they know verses from places that when's the last time you opened the book of Tzefania? Well, they know it. And so
they only know the daf it's on. They don't know where it is.
So the senior rabbinic figure goes to a child and says, "Psokli psukecha, tell me what your verse is." And then the child says the verse, and then the rabbinic figure, makes some sort of exposition about it. But it's the verse of the moment. It's got a kind of oracular function. If you go up to a child and say, "Tell me your verse," the child says the verse, and you make meaning out of that verse. It's a meaning that is like it was ordained for this moment that you were going to get that verse and you were going to get the message that it had directly for you.
It's like, or Barry, you want to say something?
Yeah, I would add a more prosaic explanation to Jeremy's poetry here, and that is that it gives a person ownership. That one of the things that we speak about with the Torah, everything ultimately connects back with the Torah. And I've been thinking a lot about the difference between Limud Torah, the study of Torah, and Parshat HaShavua. Parshat HaShavua is kind of like a friend that comes on a journey with you. And every week you're surprised at how relevant the Parsha is to what's going on in the world.
That's right.
And by picking a verse, establishing a verse, it gives us a sense that we're on the same page as Klal Yisrael.
I just want to
and with God, that's all I want to add.
I want to add just one thing, which is that for many people, there's a verse that accompanies them in their life, a pasuk lechayim, that there's some verse, that really is, part that's like really engraved in their heart. Uvacharta lechayim, for example, choose life is a very, very special verse, and we have many, many of those. And also, sometimes, and we've done this ourselves on Purim, where we just kind of randomly choose verses. We're not randomly choosing verses today, but the idea of randomly choosing something in Tanakh or randomly choosing something in the Torah is actually a useful exercise. It's a useful exercise for rabbis, and it's a useful exercise for ordinary people too.
I have to add something here. So the year I graduated from the seminary, I think was the second, maybe the third year that for the gift that we gave the school, we each of the graduating cantors and rabbis chose a pasuk or some other religious text and had it inscribed or whatever. It's a wall hanging. It's beautiful. And one of those students chose as his verse one from this parsha, V'achalta v'savata, and it was so striking that he left off uperakta, which is so you can eat and be satisfied. Okay, we all agree, but the point of the pasuk in this week's parsha is that you have to thank God for that.
All right, so then I'll leave off what I was going to say, because that's my verse. That's the verse that I'm going to start off with. And I actually am going to talk about Uverakta, The verse is part of a whole paragraph. Let's just say it's the lowest hanging fruit in this parsha.
What kind of fruit?
Ki Adonai Elohecha meviacha, chapter 8, verse 7. The Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with streams and springs and fountains issuing from plain and hill, a land of wheat and barley, of vines, figs, and pomegranates. Eretz chita u'se'ora v'gefen u'teina v'rimon, eretz zet shemen u'dvash. A land where you may eat food without stint, where you will lack nothing, a land whose rocks are iron, and from whose hills you can mine copper. Ve'achalta v'savata u'verachta et Adonai Elohecha ala haaretz hatova asher natan lach. When you have eaten your fill, give thanks to the Lord your God for the good land which He has given you. And so, of course,
You didn't give all the translate. You didn't translate all the terms of the species.
Okay, what did I miss? All of pomegranates, land of olive trees, and wheat, barley, vines, figs, pomegranates, olive, and honey. Got it. The 7 species. The 7 species, 2 staples, 3 fruits, and olive oil and honey. Honey, we are saying, is fig honey or date honey, and these are luxurious sweetener items. Okay, but the verse we focus on is V'achalta v'savata u'verakta, which is familiar to us from Birkat Hamazon. We say it every time we eat. Kakatu v'achalta v'savata u'verakta. And of course, our listeners at Camp Ramah in the Berkshires, and every Camp Ramah, would know this verse. But they don't necessarily think about it the way that we daven things. We sometimes just recite them or sing them and don't think about them. And I think even rarer is the idea of putting it in context. So what I want to do is put it in context. Now, Barry, when you said that that individual had the words "v'achalta v'savata" placed on that piece of artwork that was calligraphed, or done nicely as a gift. The reason why V'achalta v'savata is there is because in most cases where we have the word V'achalta, we have v'savata. We never have a verachta. So, for example, and I'm going to do a little bit of Exhibit A here. Okay, this is for our people viewing. I have a chart here of all the V'achalta v'savata. Yeah. V'achalta v'savata. So we have it in chapter 6, verse 11. We have our verses, V'achalta v'savata, and Uverakta is 8:10. Pen tochal v'savata, and it's also familiar to us from the Shema. V'natati esa bezarcha lev'emtacha v'achalta v'savata. I will give you the grass in your field for your animals, and you will eat, and you will be satisfied. So, in each of these cases where there's v'achalta v'savata, there's also the possibility of forgetting. But the one place where there's just an antidote to forgetting is this verse. So here's my theory, and I propose it to you. We're so worried as people, when we go into the land, and we're here with Am Yisrael, just as they are entering the land. We're so worried about the sense of, I guess you can call it arrogance, the sense of satiation, that it's because of me. You might forget, you may be tempted to forget. And so the antidote, here's my little sermon, the antidote to forgetting is blessing, is gratitude. The attitude, I guess the antidote to almost anything that is corrosive to the spiritual life is gratitude.
Discuss.
I hail you. That was brilliant, and I appreciate also the homework.
Yeah, that chart is great.
That's from my daily 929. I love that. God bless them. 1 parak a day, chapter a day.
That's great. It's about what are our religious practices? We have a religion of law. Okay, we have a religion of prescribed behaviors and norms. And is it just we like to tell people what to do and we like to keep the traditions? No, there are training, there's spiritual training, and you just illustrated that beautifully.
So let me so the question that the Talmud goes into in one of the areas is what constitutes being satisfied? It's such a great question. At what point is a person satisfied from hunger? At what point is a person satisfied, I guess, spiritually? At what point, maybe, you're the colleague who still suggested V'achalta v'savata to put on a piece of artwork. I understand what that means, in metaphorical terms, right? We we study, that is the consumption, the savata. It doesn't do it for me in terms of the spirituality of it, because I honestly feel so unsatisfied every time I study, because you realize how much you don't know and how many questions you have. It's a highly unsatisfying activity, but it's satisfying at a different level. You feel your worthiness, but like even when we study a verse, there's so much we don't know. There's so many questions. It's highly unsatisfying. So the spiritual state is gratitude for what we have and desire for what we don't have. Yeah.
So what I would suggest is that satisfaction is subjective. The thrust of Jewish law is to quantify everything so that we know where the borders are, when we've done something correctly, when we don't. I don't know that we can actually measure satisfaction in a quantitative way. How much food you actually need to eat to be satisfied? Well, it depends on what day it is, what meal it is, how you're feeling. And, I think this statement is attributed to Rabbi Israel Salanter, maybe others as well, that the job of a rabbi is to afflict the comfortable and to comfort the afflicted. Because the great danger in religion is complacency. I think what leads people away is not when things are going bad. I think more people are apt to turn to religion when things are going bad. But when things are going good, we tend to think that we're responsible for our good fortune and find it more difficult to be grateful. And therefore, the sequence here is so important that after you're satisfied, you must bless. It's not a choice that you're given. You have to express gratitude. Otherwise, you've missed the point.
I have two jokes for the matter. A little humor. Actually, in practice, the way the verse is usually read is V'achalta v'savata ubarachta, and then you ran away. Nobody deserves the bracha.
Well, that's camp.
As Barry just said, like there's a joke about that, right? Like the guy's in a terrible situation. Says, God, if you get me out of this, I'll go to shul every day. And then, whatever the situation is, there's a terrible flood, and then a boat comes by and picks him up. And he says to the guy, okay, never mind, I worked it out.
All right, let's.
I want to just one of the serious things Barry said, which I always want to pick up on, is when you think about this one in a halachic sense, quantification versus very significant subjectivity of each person. We have a basic norm of Judaism that you say the full Birkat Hamazon when you've had bread. But back in the earlier rabbinic times, back in the 2nd century, Rabbi Akiva is quoted as saying, you say whatever your food is, even if you're eating boiled vegetables, which sounds good to me, but I guess that's considered, boiled beets is considered something not too good in this story. He says, even if you're eating just like boiled beets, if that's your food, you should say the bracha. And when I was on the law committee, they took up a question that I thought was quite interesting. There's plenty of gluten-free people who never eat halachic bread. So what's the deal? If you don't eat bread, do you still say Birkat Hamazon? And Pamela Barmash wrote what she wrote. She ended up not taking what I wanted to do was take the view of Rabbi Akiva that say that it is a much more broadly subjective. When you eat and are satisfied, you should say this bracha, and the content of the food, the specific, whether it's bread or not, is less significant.
Cool. All right, we're going over to the grouch. We have given each of our rabbis have acronyms. I am the Rem, Rabbi Elliot Malamuth, the Rem, and Hagaon Rabbi Chesler is the grouch. Perfect.
Well, thank you very much.
The
verse that I chose, two verses from chapter 10. V'ata Yisrael ma Adonai Elohecha shoel meimach Kiem liyirat et Adonai Elohecha Lacha b'chol drachav v'la'aba oto v'la'abod et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha L'shmor et mitzvat Adonai et chukotav asher anochi mitzavcha hayom l'tov lach. So now, Israel, what does God want from you? He wants you to fear the Lord, your God, to go in all of his ways, to love him, to serve him, and with all your heart and with all your soul, and to observe the commandments and laws which I command you this day. And the reason why this speaks to me is because we find a very similar statement in the prophet Micha, who was a younger contemporary of what we now call First Isaiah, the 8th century Isaiah prophet, who says in a famous phrase, Yigid l'cha adam ma tov, u'ma Adonai doresh memcha, ki im asot mishpat, v'avat chesed v'atznei alechet im Elohecha. You know, human beings, what is good and what God wants from you. He wants you to do justice, to love grace, and to walk humbly with God. And the reason why this speaks to me is that most of us, most of the time, are occupied and preoccupied with the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. And we don't always pay enough attention to the other two sections of the Tanakh, the section of prophets and the writings, and they all are interrelated. And it's always instructive to make those connections, to see how pieces of the Torah are picked up in the prophets and sometimes in Ketuvim as well. And sometimes it goes the other way also. And I think if we're looking for a distillation of Judaism, this is it. That you have to love God, love justice, and do what God wants you to do.
So let me jump here and react to this, which is beautiful. I love the drasha, and I love the verse as well. But I'm going to stay with the question. I'm going to stay with the question both in Deuteronomy and in Micha. Ma Adonai Elohecha shoel meimach. Stop. What does God ask of you? Now, Deuteronomy and Micha they both give us answers. But for the individual, the person reading, for I guess me, maybe
The Ram, yeah.
I stop at the question because it's a question of identity. It's a question of who are you, what do you think, what do you believe, and when you ask yourself the question, what does God want from you? Look, God wanted me to be blank. God didn't want me to be a hockey player, that's for sure. God didn't want me to be an engineer like my father, Zichrono Livracha. God didn't want me to be a musician, even though I love music. God
wanted you to speak like God, Elliot.
God, exactly like God. If no, I mean, and it's question, and so, but of course, it's not what's your profession, but it's how do you behave in the world, and yeah, I guess we're all going to get to those things in Micha and get to here, which is this is the beginning point of wisdom. But I'd like to stop with the question. At the Friday night table, hold the glass of wine and think about it, discuss it, and ask, if you were to come up with your own answer, what would be that? And I don't need to give that answer now, but I love the question.
Sure. Okay, what I would add is that this ties in with what you were saying earlier about the Verachta, is that the things that are given here as for what God wants are things that are difficult to quantify.
Yeah,
they are subjective, and that's where we often get tripped up, because how do we know when we've done anything correctly? Indeed. And thinking of the mitzvah of tzedakah, so we have a positive commandment to give tzedakah, to give charity. How do we know when we've done it properly?
Yeah,
is it when we send an $18 check to some organization? Do we have to do it regularly? It's hard to know. And on one hand, we want to know because we want that feeling of accomplishment. And on the other hand, as I've come to appreciate as I get older, there's a great deal of uncertainty and doubt about our lives. And a lot of it's going to be unresolved.
Indeed. Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, a reaction or go straight to your verse?
We can go to my verse. I think you guys.
Okay, so the Emet Liakov.
Okay. So I'm in the same chapter, in the same passage as Barry, a little bit further down. Umaltemet or lat levavchem ve'arpechem lo takshu od. You should circumcise the foreskin of your heart and your neck. You shall not stiffen your necks anymore. Ki Adonai Elohechem hu Elohei ha'Elohim va'Adonai ha'Adonim. For the Lord God is God of all gods and master of all masters. Ha'el ha'gadol ha'gibor v'hanora. The one who is great and powerful and terrifying. Asher lo yisa panim v'lo yikach shochad. Who will not respect show no favor to respectable people nor take a bribe. Well, obviously, in the second part of that verse, we have one of the core phrases in our liturgy, in our Amidah, and it's repeated. It's repeated in other cases. For example, at the end of Psukei de Zimra, Ha'el b'ta'atzumotuzecha, Hagadol b'chod shemecha. That there you have the same quotation and a little bit of an exposition that goes. But I'm going to turn to the first part of the verse. Umaltemet or lat levavchem, circumcise the foreskin of your heart. Obviously, Judaism has a strong tradition about circumcising male babies, taking away the foreskin from the penis, and it's somehow, whatever it signified to ancient people, it is a mark of membership in the Jewish people on the human male body. But here it's given a metaphorical removing something covering. That's in that physical act, you remove some sort of covering and you make some sort of exposing, perhaps some sort of opening or vulnerability. And here in Deuteronomy, Moshe Rabbeinu gives a metaphorical application that there is some covering, something that is hiding the heart. You have to remove it so that you can be open, so that you can be vulnerable and in the moment and obedient and in connection. So there's a lot that I like about this verse. One of the main things is that it speaks to me the way religion, like I said before, there's a lot in Judaism that is about controlling the way people behave and controlling the way society functions in an ethical way. And it's not just about telling more people what to do, though. It's ultimately about building a different heart, opening up your heart in a way that makes it appropriate, makes you appropriate to be able to be with God. And it calls to mind, as Barry said, the Bible is an echo chamber. It alludes to other verses. The prophet Ezekiel says, ultimately, I'm going to cleanse you from all the bad things that you do. V'natati lachem lev chadash, v'ruach chadasha eten b'kirbechem, v'hasiroti et lev ha'even mibesarchem v'natati lachem lev basar. I'm going to give you a new heart and a new spirit, and I'm going to take away your stony heart, and I'm going to give you a heart of flesh, of softness. What I want out of religion, in addition to social behavior, in addition to ethical behavior, in addition to a wisdom, is an open heart. My own tefillah every day, at the little paragraph at the end of the Amidah, Petach libi b'toratecha, open up my heart with your Torah, not to your Torah, with your Torah. Like the Torah is the key, opens up the heart, leaves me a different person. I would add furthermore that our sister religion, and maybe our stepsister religion, there was an ancient Pharisee known as Rabbi Shaul Ish Tarshish, Paul of Tarsus, who this verse was super important to him in the Christian book of Romans. He says the real Jew, Paul there is being very nasty to Am Yisrael. He says, no, you Jews, you keep the letter of the law and circumcise your body. The true Jew, meaning the Christian, is one who gets to the spirit of the law, doesn't worry so much about the letter of the law of the body, instead circumcises the heart and has an open heart to what he thinks is the new spiritual truth. Of course, I don't follow him in that, but I kind of do like the emphasis that Paul draws from Deuteronomy and shares and affirms that an open heart, a vulnerable heart, that's the key. You can't have religion without that.
Interesting. I have two reactions to the verse and to what you said. One of them is actually an anatomical reaction, which is that there is something called the pericardium, the sac in which the heart is. And some mammals have that. I'm guessing that most animals have it, and of course humans have it. The extent to which the biblical world was cognizant of human anatomy is a question. I suppose through accident and other kinds of circumstances like murder or war, they may have seen cadavers.
How about just shechting animals? How about
Protecting animals, but there may have been plenty of human bodies that they have seen the insides of, and it's certainly it's not a leap of the imagination to consider that many people in antiquity may have known the insides of a human body. Notwithstanding that, I come to this with a certain kind of proximity because of Kim and the heart transplant. The heart that was removed was replaced by a heart without a pericardium. Okay, when you transplant a heart, it doesn't come with the sac. And the sac has a fluid around it that serves as a protection. So in a way, it's an unveiled heart, which is totally mind-blowing to think about. That in actual anatomical terms, there is a membrane of the heart. And
so not to get into Kim's medical condition, but how do they build an artificial sac?
They don't. No, it's in the heart cavity without a pericardium. Okay, so in a sense, and you could have a heart that way. Many people have what's called pericarditis, which is inflammation of the heart sac, and I suppose that there are certain kinds of remediations for that, probably including removal of that. But we don't want to give any. But we are not responsible here for any medical advice. The metaphor, we're the
metaphor, not medical.
We're the poetry world, okay? And the poetry world is there should be no barrier, no, and this is, on my mind is the last week's Nachamu, and the Kiru Alev Yerusha, to speak to. It's not to the heart, it's on Alev, to speak on to the heart, and meaning that there should be no impediments, no barriers, no mechitza, no distance, and we come to each other really, as you said now, and here with an open heart, and it's such a rich, beautiful metaphor that in addition to the what you sip wine on and think about, that's one to think about too. Barry, when you react to it.
So I also was struck by the physical image here. So you're supposed to circumcise your heart and no longer be stiff-necked. And so what we're being told to do is essentially to turn around. This is an act of tshuva, of turning. And this is, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, the second week of consolation, which leads up to our tshuva, our turning or returning to God at the turn of the year. And the way tshuva begins is by turning around, to recognize that we're not on the correct path and we have to get back on the correct path. And therefore, you circumcise your heart in order to turn around so that you could put your neck back where it belongs and no longer be stiff-necked.
Can we just conclude this talk with one of the broad themes in this parsha and possibly Deuteronomy as well? And of course, it drives home the current state of crisis that we are in as a Jewish people, and of course in Israel, which is the conditionality of the land, the conditionality of living in the land. It's you stop on these verses. And there are plenty to choose from, even in the second paragraph of the Shema and others that tell us that if you do the commandments, if you follow the commandments, you'll have a perfect, beautiful, blessed life. But if you don't, you won't. Or extrapolate from that, if you conduct yourselves in a manner which is expressed in the verse, Jeremy, that you chose here, which is Oseh Mishpat Yatom Ve'almana Ohev Ger, or upholds the cause of the fatherless and the widow, befriends the stranger, provide food and clothing, etc. In other words, the ethics of humanity in the broadest sense, and truth and justice and telling the truth and conducting the affairs of state and the affairs of life with fairness. And
Yeah,
and
I would
that
say,
sense of conditionality is very powerful. We're connected to the land in a very fragile way, I think.
I would say that the phrase that I like to use about this, and we've all got our views about politics in the various countries we live in the United States and Canada probably, and certainly in Israel, we have our views. And I don't think that there's one thing, one political stance that is, the good and right religious stance. But I certainly think there are good and right religious values.
Yeah.
And what the phrase that I like to say is that I always want the state of Israel to be worthy of Jewish history and Jewish religion. It's got to be worthy of the Jewish people, and the anxiety that we feel when we're worried about Israel is when people feel that we all know that the people of the state of Israel are, have been through a lot. They have very difficult national conflict, very difficult neighbors. They have experienced all kinds of violence, and so I don't want to sweep that away. But those of us who can sometimes feel alienated by the ultranationalist and sometimes militaristic stance of the state of Israel, what I feel I'm saying is, the points that you just made, the society that we're trying to build, which is tender, which is fair, which cares for the weak, which recognizes the equality of all people, sometimes gets ignored in the keeping the Jewish people together, defending the Jewish bodies, defending Jewish life. Those are great things. And the other thing is the ethical components, the spiritual components, the care for the vulnerable, the loyalty to ethical ideals. Those are the conditions under which those things can happen.
And those are articulated in the Declaration of Independence, as
absolutely,
you many times.
Absolutely. I don't know if people saw this. There was a Likud activist who was confronting the anti-government protesters. It's like a significantly prominent Likud activist. There's lots of material of him standing with Netanyahu, and he said the most vile things, including like, "I hate the Ashkenazim. I'm glad 6 million of you were killed." I mean, like just the most ridiculous things. And Netanyahu showed him the door. The fact that something like that goes on. Now I love the fact that the Torah says, by the way, you can only keep this land if you attain a kind of
God forbid,
excellence.
Of course, and that's the tremor that we are experiencing now is precisely at that identity ideal foundation, and this is what's on display in these demonstrations here. The future of the state, its liberal foundation, its idea as a Jewish democratic and liberal state, Medina Yehudit, Demokratit, V'Liberalit. That's
so. What I'd just like to add is perhaps a literary trope here, is that the conditionality of the land is best expressed in the Torah, which is the wandering, the history of our people, so to speak, before they entered the land. So it's easy in the sense to say, you're going into the land, you have to make a choice. You could do what God want and keep the land, or you could do something else. And one would think everyone listening to Moses give this speech would say, of course, we're going to do what God wants. But then you get to the book of Joshua and follow through Samuel, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, and you realize that the people had, for their entire history during the First Temple period, great deal of difficulty following God's law. That the conditionality of the land was not apparent to them until the very end when they lost it. And perhaps it teaches us something important, that when we're in the land, we have to be even more diligent and more vigilant about our connection to the land and what gives us right and rights in the land. Because if we think that this is our land because we're here, I think we've missed the point of the entire Tanakh.
Yeah, of course. And, we were saying this mindful of the irony that the three of us are obviously not in the land. We are speaking outside. So we come at this from the distance, both geographically and, of course, emotionally, not being in touch with the the daily reality, notwithstanding the fact that we have people in our lives there. Nevertheless, we have people in our lives everywhere, including the people that are watching us and listening to us. We are really, really thankful. We thank you for watching. We thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. And we look forward to talking with you again on the next edition of Parasha Talk. In the meantime, have a beautiful Shabbat. Shabbat
Shabbat
Shalom.
shalom.
But shalom.